John Prine fan. I mean, it had 3 of his all-time best tracks on: Illegal Smile, Sam Stone, and Angel from Montgomery. I mean, Sam Stone, any song that has a line, "There's a hole in Daddy's arm where all the money goes." Absolutely incredible. And it was Chris Christopherson that actually helped him get a record deal. Now, Chris Christopherson, actually, a lot of his stuff's on Monument, but he introduced John Prine to Atlantic Records, so he certainly got himself onto a very mainstream record label, and he's on tour as well. America and Canada, well, for the rest of this year, basically, September through to 31st of December, so lots of opportunities to catch John Prine.
Don't go anywhere now.
John will be right back right after this.
Yes, he will. Check out the new book from Derek Shelmerdine,
Rock and Roll Unraveled.
It tells the story of rock and roll from its roots right up until the mid-'70s punk.
Rock and Roll Unraveled.
Not just the music, but also the events that shaped the music.
Rock and Roll Unraveled.
It includes the backgrounds to recording sessions, singles, album releases, births and deaths, epic concerts, and festivals.
Rock and Roll Unraveled.
Shelmerdine has made a painstaking effort to document pretty much every event that would prove significant in shaping popular music.
Rock and Roll Unraveled.
Purchase the book at www.rockandrollunraveled.com. Follow him at Twitter at R&R Unraveled, and look him up on Facebook at Rock and Roll Unraveled.
Rock and Roll Unraveled.
By author Derek Shelmerdine.
Available now.
I think of myself more as a song and dance man, you know.
The only reason that we are still together is that the subtlety of delicate change in the music.
Some of it's old, some of it's new, something borrowed, something brown.
Let's say you have a band that wears makeup, and you've got snakes, and you've got guillotines, and you've got really hard rock, Detroit rock and roll.
Well, all those groups and people that started off when we were starting off, they're all still going.
It's funny how many times rock and roll's been dead. Yeah, how many times people have said it's been dead, it just keeps coming back like a bloody phoenix.
Rock and roll!
You know, that I think that's the first time we've ever talked, even mentioned Mr. Chris Christopherson in any of our conversations. That's amazing.
Absolutely. He's a very talented guy. I mean, he was lucky that he didn't die with Buddy Holly, because he was in Buddy Holly, because Buddy Holly had split from the Crickets. At the time, Buddy Holly did that fateful last tour to get some money. I mean, touring the Midwest in December, the winter, is not a good place to be. It can be chilly. I used to go to Fargo for various reasons, and I was there in the winter. And it's a cold old place. But Chris Christopherson was I think he was playing bass as Buddy Holly's backing band, and he should have been on the plane that Buddy Holly hired, because they were all getting frozen to death. Literally, the drummer on the tour bus ended up in hospital with mild frostbite. So you can see what it was like. And Chris Christopherson swapped his seat. I think he swapped with the Big Bopper.
Wow, that's a lucky call.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely incredible. So, we very nearly did not have a Chris Christopherson career ahead of that, because that was, February 1959. So he's on borrowed time, as they say.
Definitely. Up next, we have the famous October 13th. The famous October 13th.
Yes, it's a good day to be born. I think 1940. Happy birthday, Chris Farlowe. Now, Chris Farlowe's one of those British singers from the 60s who was, the guy just should have been so much bigger. He's in the same sort of vein as people like Eric Burdon, but he's never got the international acclaim that people like Burdon have got. But he's interesting because, he went on. He started out in a skiffle group. He was born John Henry Dayton in Islington in London, and his first band was the John Henry Skiffle Group back in the late 1950s. That morphed into his own band, Chris Farlowe and the Thunderbirds. And interestingly enough, in '66, he was joined by Carl Palmer, who was only 16 years old at the time. So I think that was Carl Palmer's first professional gig, and he was with him for a while.
Of ELP fame.
Oh, absolutely. So, he's worked with some pretty serious people. His third UK hit was Ride On Baby, again in 66. And that was written by Jagger and Richard and produced by Mick Jagger. I mean, you don't think of Mick Jagger as a producer, but he does pop up all over the place doing odd productions for people. And then Chris Farlow went on to join Colosseum. I mean, serious jazz rock band. He wasn't one of the original members. He joined in time for their third album, Daughter of Time, with Dave Greenslade, who went on to form the band Greenslade, and of course John Heisman, who was the power behind Colosseum 1 and Colosseum 2. And then he went on in the early 70s. In 72, he joined Atomic Rooster, again not a founding member, but they're in time for their fourth album, Made in England. He's just had such a great career, and it's a shame that he hasn't got more. I mean, he's had hits, solo hits, lots in the UK, and he's had some in America as well, but he's not one of these names that people recognise very generally.
But it doesn't take away from his talent, Derek, and you know that. Some of these guys, you just can't. There's just not enough spots at the top there to fill everybody in. That's the problem.
Absolutely. I remember seeing Chris Farlow in the mid-'60s, and he really is an awesome singer. And he's on tour as well. I can only find a couple of dates, and they're 11th of January and 1st of March of next year. But I wouldn't mind betting that, keep an eye on his Facebook site and places like that, and my website, because if I can find more dates, I keep updating the dates. So once people go into the Who's on Tour on the website, they stay there, and each month I just update it just when people start new tours. I mean, there's over 100 people on there now, and they've all essentially emanated from this show, John, from talking about what people were up to and where they are now.
And that's rockandrollunraveled.com, just in case everybody forgot when you mentioned it earlier.
Absolutely.
You're really great about that, Derek, though. You give me a show plan, and then you also post it on the website so everybody can follow along if they if they want to. You do amazing work, my friend, and I can't thank you enough for being even a part of the broadcast here, because you know your stuff, and if you don't know it, you go and find it out, which is great.
Well, thank you very much, sir. It's a pleasure working with you as always.
Enough of the man love, I guess. October 14th is next.
Absolutely. Back to the rock and roll. This is one of the stranger ones. This guy, Cliff Richard, a British superstar, absolute superstar, born the 14th of October 1940. He was born Harry Webb in Lucknow in India. And the guy is a phenomenal success. I mean, he was one of the original rock and roll 50s artists. He was one of these guys that, if you catch his 1950s singles, he sounds just like Elvis Presley, as every other aspiring British rock and roll artist attempted to sound like either Elvis Presley or Gene Vincent. But he's never managed to crack America. I mean, if you look at his first three American singles, it sort of tells the story, really. In 1959, he managed to get to number 30. These are all Billboard rankings, with a song called Living Doll that was, a big hit over here. But his next hit wasn't until 1964. But the timing of it was absolutely unbelievable. He did a cover of Tommy Edwards's early 50s, It's All in the Game, and he managed to get to number 25 in America with that. But that was actually 3 weeks before the Beatles appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show. So if you like, he was like just a whisker ahead of the British invasion of 1964. So his success there was not in any way attributable to the Beatles.
It's almost like it was premature. Like he came out too early.
Absolutely, but what's incredible was that you'd have thought, he had a hit then just before that, and then the Beatles appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show in February, and by the end of 1964 there were British artists and beat groups having loads of hit singles. But it never happened for Cliff Richard. His next hit single wasn't until in America, wasn't until 1976.
12 years later.
Woman. Yeah, absolutely. that got to number 6. I think it's probably his biggest hit to date in America.
The Devil Woman.
It's actually, Cliff Richard is a very devout Christian as well. I mean, he wears, he promotes his Christianity quite a lot. So recording a song like Devil Woman is a bit of a surprise, really, for Cliff. But his original band, well, the band he was with for up until the 80s, I think, they were on and off working together. Best known as the Shadows, but they were originally called the Drifters. So back in the Living Doll days, you'll find his early singles are Cliff Richard and the Drifters. They changed their name to avoid any confusion with the very famous American vocal group of the same name. I mean, the Drifters, everybody has heard of them. But happy birthday, Hank Marvin. He was born on October the 28th, 41, and he was the lead guitarist. And he was one of the original British rock and roll guitar heroes. There's no doubt about that. He also started off in the world of skiffle in the UK. He was in a group called the Vipers. And he reputedly owned the first ever Fender guitar that came into the UK.
He did what? What with the first ever guitar?
He apparently he's widely reported as owning the first ever Fender that found its way into the UK.
Awesome.
So when Leo started mass producing them, he had one of the first to come to the UK.
Wow, that's an interesting piece of history right there.
Yeah, absolutely. He was born Brian Robson Rankin. He was also from the north of England, the same sort of part of the world as Sting, basically. Although he was born in Newcastle.
And he was like one of the earliest British guitar heroes.
He was, yeah. In terms of rock guitarists, he was one of the very first British rock and roll rock guitarists. He's well renowned, and lots of people suggest that they were influenced by him. But what happened with Cliff towards the end of the 50s? He sort of gravitated more into pop music and movies, and he really became a family entertainer more. So he was much more in the sort of pop, light entertainment TV world. But in Virgin hit singles, which is the Guinness hit singles, I think, it's disappeared now. And the Virgin one seems to be the one that lists all the acts. In their volume 2 that was published, I should say, in 2010, Cliff is actually at number 2 of their list of acts with the most top 40 British hits. He had 124.
And number 1 with Elvis, right?
Absolutely. The only person with more hits at that point in the UK was Elvis, with 146, but he's virtually unheard of in America.
Of course he is. Yeah, I've not heard of him, and I'm sure a lot of the listeners, you're enlightening him at this moment.
Absolutely. I doubt if many American listeners to the show will have come across him, but everybody in the UK will have heard of him. He's not one of after the late 1950s, he went very much into the pop music, as I said. So he's one of these people that's not really very cool to like. It's a sort of person your mother would like, as it were. But he's got a big following in the UK.
And Cliff Richards is on tour. I want to ask something real quick. Is there a reason why he changed his name from Harry Webb? Because I actually thought that would be a great band's name, Harry Webb.
Interesting you should say that, because that's exactly how it came about. He started off as well in the skiffle era, and I can't remember the guy's name now, but he got involved with this manager when he was coming together with the guys that formed the original version of his first backing band, the Drifters. And they were going out, because the Drifters weren't that successful in the UK in the 50s. So that wasn't a surprising name to pick up. But what happened when the original lineup of the Drifters got together and met this manager, they said, well, what you really need is you need to be Somebody and the Drifters, the name of the lead singer. And they thought the opposite, actually. They actually thought, well, we don't really think Harry Webb and the Drifters is rock and roll enough. So they sat down. I forget exactly how Cliff Richard came about, but it was based on some people they knew and some combinations, and they became Cliff Richard and the Drifters. So you're absolutely right. That's exactly how it came about, because they didn't think Harry Webb was cool enough as a sort of front man